They mocked her, laughed at her, and treated her like she didn't belong on the range. But the moment she raised that rifle, every joke died. Because the woman they called Nobody was actually the ghost operative the military thought was dead, and she had come back for justice.
So tell me, sweetheart, what's your rank? Or are you just here to polish our rifles? Admiral Victor Kane's voice cut through the desert heat, dripping with condescension. He and his 6 officers, all decked out in crisp Navy uniforms, chuckled as they stepped over the firing line. The sun was relentless at Fort Davidson's outdoor range, where 15 people were trying to qualify. Dust danced in the air, thick with the smell of gun oil. The woman they were mocking didn't even look up. At 29 years old, she had a soldier's posture, but her uniform was bare, no insignia, no rank. She sat cross-legged in the shade, her hands moving with practiced grace over the pieces of a disassembled M110 sniper rifle. She methodically wiped down the bolt carrier group, every motion efficient and deliberate. The kind of skill that only comes from countless hours of repetition, not from reading a book. Kane swaggered closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was 58, his chest a billboard of medals, his face set in a permanent scowl that demanded obedience. His shadow fell over her, but she kept on cleaning, her rhythm unbroken. "I asked you a question, miss." Lieutenant Brooks, the Admiral's number 2, sidled up next to him. 32 and tanned, his cocky attitude was practically part of the uniform. He crossed his arms, a smirk playing on his lips that had no warmth behind it. "Maybe she doesn't speak English, sir," he suggested. "Probably just maintenance staff. You know, they let anyone wander onto the range for cleanup duty these days." The other officers snickered. A fresh-faced junior lieutenant, so new you could still see the academy shine on him, nudged his friend. $10 says she doesn't even know how to load that thing. 20 says she's never handled anything bigger than a 9mm. Across the range, near the control tower, an older man named Ellis turned his head. At 62, the rangemaster's back was still ramrod straight, his face weathered like the desert itself. He'd been running this range for 15 years and had seen every kind of soldier the military could produce. He narrowed his eyes, watching the drama unfold. There was something about the way the woman held the rifle parts, the specific angle of her wrists, her slow, controlled breathing. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out. His jaw clenched. He'd seen that breathing pattern before, in very specific, very dangerous situations. Kane leaned in, his voice dropping to a low growl, the kind senior officers use when they're pretending to be patient but are actually furious. "Look at me when I'm talking to you, whether you're a petty officer or a seaman or whatever you are." For a split second, the woman's hands paused. Then, with the same deliberate care, she set down the bolt carrier and the cleaning cloth. Her fingers were perfectly still, no sign of nerves. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes were a calm, stormy, gray-green. They met Kane's glare head-on, showing no fear, no anger, no emotion at all. "No rank to report, sir," she said, her voice quiet and even, refusing to take the bait. "Just here to shoot." Brooks let out a loud snort. "Just here to shoot. You hear that, Admiral? She's just here to shoot." He turned to the others. "I hope she's got someone to hold her hand. The kick on these things is a beast if you're not prepared." "Yeah, maybe we should spot for her," another officer chimed in with a grin. "Make sure she doesn't hurt herself. Or embarrass the service, for that matter." Ellis shifted his weight, his hand drifting instinctively toward the radio on his belt. He didn't press the button. Not yet. But his entire focus was now on the woman and her breathing. 4-4-4, combat breathing, box breathing. It was a technique drilled into soldiers in very elite training programs, the kind most people have never even heard of. He glanced at her hands again, remembering how she held the bolt, fingers positioned perfectly for a rapid reassembly in the dark. A lump formed in his throat as Kane straightened up, hands on his hips. "Are you authorized to be on this range?" "Yes, sir." "And you intend to fire that weapon today?" "Yes, sir." "At what range?" For the very first time, a flicker of something crossed her face, not quite a smile, just the ghost of one. 800 meters, sir." The officers erupted in loud, derisive laughter. Brooks actually slapped his knee. 800! Oh, that's rich. He looked at Kane. "Sir, with all due respect, I have to see this. For educational purposes, of course. We could all use a good laugh." Kane's face remained a stone mask, but a glint appeared in his eyes, maybe amusement, maybe something colder. By all means, Lieutenant, let's see what our mystery guest can do. He gestured to the firing line. Please, show us what you've got. The woman rose to her feet in a single, fluid motion, without using her hands for support. Her uniform was standard issue, faded from use, with no name, tape, or unit patch to identify her. She picked up the rifle, which she'd already reassembled, gave the chamber a half-second glance, and walked to lane 7. Ellis found himself walking toward her lane without even thinking about it, wanting a better look. A feeling of dread and anticipation was crawling up his spine. The woman settled in at the bench, resting the rifle on the sandbag. Her form was absolutely flawless. Left hand under the stock, right hand on the grip, her body perfectly aligned with the weapon. She made a tiny, fractional adjustment to the rear sandbag, then became perfectly still. Brooks leaned against the tower, arms folded. Someone should probably get her extra ammo. She'll need a ton of practice shots just to hit the paper from that far out. Does she even know how to take the safety off? Someone else asked. She probably thinks the scope is a telescope, another officer added. Kane stood with his hands clasped behind his back, just watching. The amusement was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, focused attention. The woman ignored all of them. She just kept breathing. 444. Her trigger finger remained straight, off the trigger. Perfect discipline, textbook perfect. She reached up and made a tiny adjustment to the scope's parallax, then another to the windage. Her movements were minute, precise, the kind of adjustments you only make after doing something thousands of times. Ellis was now just 10 feet away, close enough to see the details. The way her thumb rested on the receiver, the exact placement of her cheek against the stock. His heart began to pound. He knew that stance. He'd seen it only twice in his entire career, and both times were in situations classified far beyond his security clearance. "Whenever you're ready," Kane called out, his voice heavy with fake politeness. "We don't have all day." The woman's breathing pattern shifted. She took 3 deep, cleansing breaths. On the 4th cycle, at the very bottom of her exhale, when her body was at its absolute stillest, her finger moved to the trigger. The first shot was a clean, sharp crack. The rifle's recoil was absorbed smoothly into her shoulder. She didn't even flinch. Without taking her eye from the scope, she worked the bolt, chambered the next round, settled, and breathed. The second shot followed. Then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th. The entire sequence, from the first shot to the last, took just 18 seconds. Ellis didn't need to look at the monitor. He already knew what he would see. But he raised his spotting scope anyway, focusing on the target 800 meters away. It was a standard silhouette with scoring rings, and right in the dead center, in the highest scoring zone, were 5 holes. 5 perfect shots, grouped so tightly they were almost touching. A perfect bullseye, 5 times over. He lowered the scope, his hands trembling slightly. Brooks and the other officers had gone dead silent. They were all staring at the tower monitor, which displayed the live feed from the target camera. The digital scoring system flashed the results in bright green. 5 shots, 5 tens. A perfect score, from 800 meters in 18 seconds. Kane's jaw was clenched so hard it looked like it might crack. He walked right up to the screen, as if standing closer might change the numbers. "Check the equipment," he ordered quietly. "Make sure that rangefinder is calibrated." "Sir, it's calibrated every morning," Ellis said, his voice hoarse. "It's protocol. The reading is accurate. Check it again." One of the junior officers ran out to the 800-meter line with a handheld laser. He took 3 readings and radioed back. "Distance confirmed, sir. 800 meters, plus or minus .5. Brooks was now just staring at the woman. She was sitting back from her rifle, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her expression as neutral as if she'd just tied her shoes. He cleared his throat. "Lucky shots. The wind must have died down." He squinted. "Or maybe that's a custom scope. What kind of glass are you using?" She just looked at him with those unreadable, stormy eyes. "I asked you a question," Brooks snapped, his voice getting sharper. "Standard issue, Leopold," she replied flatly. "Same as yours. No way. Nobody shoots like that with standard issue gear." Brooks turned to Kane. Sir, I demand to inspect her rifle. There have to be unauthorized modifications. A laser, a stabilizer, something that gives her an unfair advantage. Kane gave a single curt nod. Do it. Brooks started toward lane 7, his hand reaching out for the rifle. The woman stayed perfectly still as he approached, not making a move to stop him. He snatched the rifle from the bench, turning it over in his hands, inspecting every inch the scope mounts, the trigger, the barrel, his face twisted with frustration as he found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. It was just a standard issue M110 with a Leopold Mark V scope, meticulously maintained. No tricks, no secret modifications, just a rifle. He slammed it back down on the bench. Fine, he scoffed. So you can shoot. That doesn't mean a thing. One lucky string doesn't make you a sniper. It could have been a fluke, a gust of wind, anything. Before he could stop himself, Ellis stepped forward. Lieutenant, his voice cut across the range, causing heads to turn. That was not luck. That's enough, Rangemaster Ellis. Stand down, Kane cut in, his voice cold and flat. We appreciate your input. Ellis clamped his mouth shut, but his eyes were glued to the woman. She met his stare for a split second, and something unspoken passed between them, a flicker of recognition, maybe even a warning. Then she broke contact, her focus returning to the rifle. Kane stalked down to lane 7, the heels of his boots clicking sharply on the concrete. He stopped right beside her, arms folded across his chest, studying her as if she were a complex puzzle he was determined to solve. Where did you learn to shoot like that? He demanded. Various locations, sir. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm cleared to give you, sir. Brooks let out a snort of contempt. You're not cleared for anything. You don't have any clearance. You're a nobody who got lucky. He leaned in, his voice dripping with disdain. Someone probably coached you, probably had you practice this exact shot on this exact range, just so you could put on a show. I've seen your type before memorize one little trick to try and impress the higher-ups. The woman didn't even flinch. She simply began to break down the rifle, her hands moving with an effortless precision that came from pure muscle memory. Kane's eyes narrowed. If you're half as good as that performance suggests, you won't have any problem proving it again, under much stricter conditions. She paused her movements, the bolt carrier group halfway out. What conditions, sir? The official qualification test. Tomorrow morning, 0800. Different range, unknown distance. With a time limit, the whole 9 yards. You pass, you get certified. You fail, he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a low threat, and you are off my range for good. And I'll personally make sure everyone knows you were just a one-hit wonder. Sir, with all due respect, I'm not here to impress anyone. Then you should have no problem proving it, Kane said, straightening up. 0800, bring your own gear. And if you're even thinking of backing out, don't bother showing your face. I have no time for people who waste my resources. Brooks smirked. This is gonna be good. I'll be sure to bring a camera, for the official record. The officers walked away, their chatter and laughter filling the air. Ellis remained rooted to his spot, 20 feet away, just watching. The woman methodically finished disassembling the rifle, placing each component carefully into its foam-lined case before shutting the lid. She stood, picked up the case, and started to leave. As she walked past Ellis, she slowed for just a heartbeat. Her eyes met his, and in that fleeting glance, he saw something that sent a chill down his spine. It wasn't anger or fear. It was a deep, weary patience, the look of someone who has been waiting a very, very long time for the inevitable to finally happen. Rangemaster, she said, her voice barely a whisper, just those 2 words. Then she was gone, her boots stirring up little puffs of dust as she walked away into the afternoon sun. He watched her until she was completely out of sight. Then, with a hand that had started to tremble again, he pulled out his radio and switched it to a secure, encrypted channel. Control, this is Rangemaster Ellis. I need to flag a situation. Off the ref record, a crackle of static, then a voice. Go ahead, Ellis. He paused, scanning the area to make sure he was alone. The shooter, the one who just put 5 rounds in the 10 ring from 800 meters in under 20 seconds. I think he had to stop and swallow hard. I think we need to run her prints and do it quietly. Because if she is who I think she is, we have a very, very serious problem on our hands. Copy that, Ellis. Send me her lane number and the timestamp. We'll look into it. Ellis lowered the radio, his eyes fixed on the now empty lane 7, where the sandbags still held the ghost of her rifle's impression. The 5 gleaming brass casings still lay on the ground, catching the light of the setting sun. 5 perfect shots, 18 seconds, 800 meters. He'd been doing this for 15 years. He'd seen Olympic champions, Special Forces legends, and Marine Scout snipers with 2 decades of experience. Not a single one of them had ever shot a group that tight, at that distance, under that kind of pressure. Not unless they were part of a completely different world. He remembered her breathing pattern 444. He pictured her grip, her stance, and the unnerving calm in her eyes as 6 officers verbally tore her apart. She never took the bait, never defended herself, never offered an explanation. She just absorbed it all, like someone who had endured far worse. So much worse. She acted like someone who knew that words are meaningless when your target is 800 meters away. Ellis bent down and picked up one of the spent casings, turning it over in his hand. Standard Lake City brass. Nothing fancy. Just a bullet that had gone exactly where she wanted it to. He slipped it into his pocket without a second thought and began walking back to the control tower. His mind was racing, connecting dots he desperately didn't want to connect, dots that were forming a picture he was terrified to see. Because if his hunch was right, then Admiral Kane had just made the biggest mistake of his entire career. And tomorrow morning, when she showed up for that qualification test, things were about to get very complicated, very fast. If you think a lucky shot is all she's got, just wait until you see what she's been hiding this whole time. Smash that like button if you're ready for some silent, deadly justice. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss seeing these arrogant officers get exactly what they deserve. The sun sank lower, casting long, coppery shadows across the range. In the distance, a door slammed shut. The voices of the base personnel faded as they headed back to their barracks. The range fell silent, leaving only the targets standing like lonely sentinels in the fading light. Lane 7 was quiet, empty, and waiting. Tomorrow was going to be one for the books. Inside the Fort Davidson Administrative Building, 5:15 p.m., Lieutenant Brooks was glued to his laptop in the small office he shared with 2 other junior officers, his coffee long forgotten. He'd been rewatching the same clip for at least 10 minutes. The woman, the rifle. 5 shots, 18 seconds. Every single one drilling the dead center of the target. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read from 15:47:22 to 15:47:40, 18 seconds. It just didn't seem possible. He hit rewind again, watching her fluidly get into position, seeing how the rifle barely kicked with each shot, observing her work the bolt with a speed that spoke of 10,000 repetitions. And he knew, with a sinking feeling, that she had probably done it more. No one gets that good without burning through an insane amount of ammo and time, the kind of training you don't get in a standard military file. The door creaked open and his roommate Jensen came in, dropping a heavy gear bag on the floor. "You still watching that? Let it go, man." The girl got lucky. Lucky? Brooks didn't even look up from the screen. 5 shots, 800 meters, 18 seconds, all in the 10 ring. That's not luck, Jensen. Jensen just shrugged as he kicked off his boots. So she's good. So what? The military's full of good shooters. Not this good, Brooks insisted. Not from that range, not that fast. He finally tore his gaze away from the video. "I've been shooting for 8 years. I've qualified as an expert marksman 3 years in a row. The best I've ever done at 800 meters is 32 seconds for 5 shots, and I was thrilled with that. She did it in 18, and her grouping was tighter than anything I've ever produced. So she's better than you. It happens. Get over it." But Brooks couldn't get over it. Something else was eating at him, something he couldn't quite name. It was the way she carried herself, the rhythm of her breathing, the way she didn't even react when Kane and the others were laying into her. It was like she'd heard it all before, like she'd survived things that made a dressing down from an officer feel like nothing more than annoying background noise. He shut the laptop and leaned back, the chair groaning in protest. I'm checking her gear tomorrow morning, before the test, making sure it's all regulation. Dude, Kane already did that. I know what Kane did. I want to see for myself. Something feels wrong. She's too polished, too calm, the pieces don't fit. Jensen gave him a long, appraising look. You know what your problem is? You can't handle the fact that some random woman waltzed onto your range and outshot you in front of the Admiral. That's all this is. That's not Brooks cut himself off. What if Jensen was right? Maybe it was just his ego talking. But that didn't change the facts. People don't shoot like that without a backstory. And whatever her story was, she was keeping it under lock and key. No name on her uniform, no rank, no unit patch. Nothing but a standard uniform, a rifle, and a level of skill that was completely at odds with the blank slate she presented. He stood up and grabbed his jacket. I'm going to run her through the system, see what I can find. You don't even know her name. I have her face, Brooks shot back, and I have the exact time she was on my range. That's a start. He headed for the door, then stopped. And if I'm right, if there's something she's hiding, then tomorrow's test is about to get very interesting. Jensen just shook his head and pulled out his phone. Whatever you say, man. Just let me know when you find out she's just some gifted private with a bad attitude. I'll be sure to laugh at you then. Brooks left without another word. The hallway was sterile and empty, the only sound the low hum of the fluorescent lights above. He took the stairs 2 at a time down to the ground floor, heading straight for the administrative offices. Personnel files, security clearances, service records, it was all digitized now, cross-referenced across every single branch of the armed forces. If she was a legitimate soldier, her file would be in there. And if she wasn't, well, that was a whole other can of worms. He swiped his ID card to unlock the door to the personnel office. It was after hours, but his clearance let him in. The room was pitch black, lit only by the faint hum of a computer monitor in sleep mode. He dropped into the nearest chair, typed in his login, and immediately pulled up the day's access logs for the shooting range. He scrolled down, looking for lane 7, timestamp 15, 45 to 1600. He found the entry, but where a name should have been, there was nothing. Just a short note, walk on, cleared by Rangemaster Ellis. Brooks scowled. That wasn't right. Every single walk-on had to show ID. It was the rule. How did this woman get past the front desk without even giving a name? He switched over to the security camera archives, pulling up the feed that covered the sign-in desk and rewound to 1530. And there she was, walking right up to the counter, handing something over to the clerk. The clerk barely glanced at it, typed a few keys on his keyboard, and just waved her through. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. Brooks zoomed the image in, focusing on her hand. She was holding a card of some kind, but the camera resolution was too grainy to see any details. It could have been a regular military, ID, or it could have been something else entirely. Worse, the clerk's computer screen was turned away from the camera, giving him no clue what was typed into the system. It was a complete dead end. Brooks leaned back in his chair, feeling a surge of frustration. He was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle, something that would tell him who she was and what she was doing here. He thought back to how Rangemaster Ellis had acted the way the old man clammed up after he saw her shoot. And then he remembered the call Ellis made on the encrypted radio. Brooks had seen him do it. He'd watched Ellis deliberately walk away from everyone else before keying the mic like he was afraid of being overheard. Ellis knew something. Brooks was absolutely certain of it. And first thing tomorrow, before that test kicked off, he was going to find out what it was. In the Rangemaster's office at 5:45 p.m., Ellis just sat at his desk, staring at the phone, his hands folded neatly on the blotter. It had rung 20 minutes ago. The call had lasted less than 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes had turned his entire world upside down. The voice on the other end was calm, all business, the kind of voice that never wasted a single word. Rangemaster Ellis, this is Colonel Vance from G2. We've looked into the inquiry you sent over this afternoon. The person you asked about is cleared to be on your range. Beyond that, I can't give you any more information. Do you understand, sir? I need to know. You need to know that she is cleared. That is all. Do not run her prints. Do not flag her access. And do not, under any circumstances, discuss this conversation with anyone outside of a secure channel. Are we clear, Range Master? Ellis had felt his throat go dry. Yes, sir. Clear. Good. And Ellis, if she shoots tomorrow, you let her shoot. Do not interfere. That's an order. The line went dead before Ellis could even think of a reply. Now, he was sitting in the silence of his office, trying to make sense of it all. G2. Intelligence. They never got involved in day-to-day range operations. They didn't make calls down to a place like Fort Davidson unless something very, very big was going down. Something that fell squarely into the realm of need to know and way above your pay grade. He'd been in the Army long enough to read between the lines. The vague non-answers, the commands dressed up as simple instructions, and the unspoken warning that asking any more questions would be a career-ending mistake. This woman wasn't just some hotshot shooter. She was something else. Something protected. The kind of person who makes full bird colonels from intelligence call down and tell old range masters to stand down and keep their mouths shut. Ellis opened his desk drawer and pulled out the spent shell casing he'd pocketed from her lane, rolling it between his fingers. It was standard brass, but the way she'd fired it, the chilling precision, the impossible speed that was anything but standard, that was something else entirely. He thought about the tattoo he'd almost seen when she was reassembling her rifle. Her sleeve had ridden up for just a second, but it was long enough for him to catch a flash of ink on her forearm. Dark, geometric lines. He hadn't gotten a clear look, but it was there. And if his gut feeling about who she was turned out to be right, that tattoo would tell a very specific, very dangerous story. Tomorrow morning, when she showed up for that qualification test, things were going to get messy, because Admiral Kane had no idea what he was about to step into. And Brooks, with his ego all bruised and his desperate need to prove himself, was going to push her. He was going to push her hard. And when you push someone like her, someone with that kind of training, that kind of past, you don't get the reaction you're expecting. You get something much, much worse. Ellis picked up his phone, his thumb scrolling through the contacts until he found a name he hadn't dialed in 3 years. Master Sergeant Lynn, retired. He was living out in Mesa now, about a 40-minute drive away. Lynn had been a ghost, spending 20 years in countries that aren't on any map, doing things that never make it into official reports. If anyone could confirm Ellis's hunch, it was him. He pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before a gravelly voice answered. Ellis. This is a surprise. Lynn, I need to ask you something. Strictly off the record. There was a brief pause. Go on. If I were to describe a shooter to you, female, late 20s, no rank or unit patches visible, shoots 5 perfect 10s at 800 meters in under 20 seconds with standard issue gear, what would you tell me? The silence on the other end was much longer this time. When Lynn finally spoke, his voice was different. Flat. Dangerous. I'd tell you to stop asking questions and walk away, Ellis. That's what I was afraid of. Ellis, you listen to me. If you have someone like that on your range, you just do your job and that's it. You don't dig, you don't guess, and you sure as hell don't get in her way. Kaine is pushing her. He scheduled a public qualification test for tomorrow. He's trying to humiliate her. Lynn let out a quiet string of curses. Then Kane is a fool, and you better be ready for things to go sideways. How sideways? The kind of sideways that gets people asking questions you can't answer, Lynn said. The kind that gets flagged all the way up to the Pentagon if it blows up. Ellis, I'm not kidding. If she is who I think she is, you're not dealing with some enlisted kid trying to make a name for herself. You're dealing with someone who has been through the absolute worst this world can throw at a person and walked out the other side. And if Kaine pushes too hard, Lynn cut himself off. Just be ready. That's all I'm gonna say. The line went dead. Ellis slowly lowered the phone. His hands were shaking again. He looked at the shell casing one last time before dropping it back into the drawer and turning the key in the lock. Tomorrow morning, 0800 hours, lane 3, the qualification test. A different range, different setup, with all the pressure Admiral Kane could possibly apply. And somewhere on base, the woman with no name and eyes like a gathering storm was getting ready. She wasn't worried. She wasn't nervous. She was just preparing. Because whatever Kaine thought was going to happen tomorrow, he was wrong. Dead wrong. Ellis stood up, clicked off his desk lamp, and walked to the door. As he stepped out into the cool desert evening, he said a silent prayer. Not for the woman, she didn't need it. He said it for Kaine, because tomorrow morning, the Admiral was about to learn a very painful lesson about making assumptions. And that lesson would be delivered from 800 meters away in under 20 seconds. In temporary quarters, Building 12, at 2200 hours, the room was tiny and bare. Cinder block walls painted a dull institutional beige, a single cot, a metal locker, and a desk and chair bolted to the floor. It was standard issue lodging for personnel just passing through. There were no personal effects anywhere, except for a single duffel bag on the floor next to the cot. The woman sat at the desk, her face illuminated by the blue-white glow of her open laptop. But she wasn't looking at the screen. She was looking down at her own hands, at the faint, web-like scar tissue across her knuckles, almost invisible in the gloom, at the thick calluses on her fingertips, built up from a lifetime of pulling a trigger, at the thin white line on her left ring finger, where a piece of shrapnel had buried itself so deep it had to be cut out in the field. Every mark told a story. Every scar was a chapter in a book that almost no one would ever be allowed to read. Her sleeve was finally rolled up. There was no need to hide it when she was alone. The tattoo covered her forearm, running from the middle of the arm to just below her elbow. It was the crosshairs of a scope reticle, and inside it, the number 847 in clean, precise digits. Underneath, in smaller text, were the words Death Angel and the dates 2018 to 2021. The ink was military grade, done by an expert. It wasn't for decoration. It was a document, a record, evidence. She traced the outline with a single finger, feeling the slightly raised skin where the ink had settled. 847. Not all of them were bad people. Some were just unlucky enough to be in the wrong place, at the wrong time, on the wrong side of a war that wasn't theirs. But they all shared one thing. They were targets, designated, confirmed, and eliminated. She had done her job, every single time. The laptop made a soft chime. A new email had arrived. She glanced at the screen. There was no sender's name, only an encrypted address that was just a random string of letters and numbers. She opened it, typed in the decryption key from pure memory, and read the message. Situation developing as expected. Kaine took the bait. Test scheduled for 0800. Brooks is digging. Ellis knows more than he's letting on. Proceed to phase 2. Reveal only if you are forced. Package delivery confirmed for 23:30 hours. Good luck, Captain. She closed the email, ran a program that wiped the message completely, and then shut the laptop. Captain, it had been a long, long time since anyone had called her that to her face. 3 years, to be exact. 3 years since the bombing in Kabul, since the explosion that was supposed to have killed her. 3 years since the 8 months she'd spent in a basement, zip-tied to a metal chair, answering the same questions over and over again, while men with empty faces did things to her that she still saw in her nightmares. They were so sure they had broken her. They were wrong. You can't break a person who has already accepted that they're dead. You can hurt them. You can make them scream. But you can't take away the one thing that makes them who they are if they've already let go of everything else. She had survived by becoming nothing, by being an empty shell, by waiting. And then, when they finally made a mistake, when they left her alone for just 15 minutes because they thought she was too broken to even move, she had killed 3 of them with a piece of rebar and simply walked out the door. She had stumbled 12 miles through enemy territory in the dead of night, barefoot, with blood seeping from a dozen cuts, only to nearly be shot by the Pakistani border guards she finally reached. The SEALs who came for her didn't bother with questions. They hauled her onto the helo, threw a shock blanket over her, and airlifted her out. The interrogation, the doctors, the psych exams, all of it came later. And then, a decision from people far above her rank decided her fate. Captain Vera Cross was a compromised asset. Her identity was blown. For the safety of everyone, especially her own, she had to drop off the face of the earth. So, that's what they did. A new name, a clean slate, a whole new life. Her call sign, Ghost, became her reality. For 3 years, she drifted, taking on menial jobs, staying completely off the grid, and trying to piece together who she was if she wasn't Death Angel anymore. But then, a piece of intel found its way to her. The very same network that had murdered her father and tortured her was still active. They were still buried deep within the military's own structure, selling secrets, wrecking operations, and getting good soldiers killed for a payday. Their next target was Admiral Victor Kaine, not because he was a crooked officer, but because he was about to blow the whistle in a closed congressional hearing on procurement scams and intelligence leaks. He simply knew too much. 8 years earlier, he and Brigadier General David Cross had launched an investigation that came dangerously close to exposing the entire operation. That investigation came to an abrupt end when David Cross was killed by a car bomb right outside his Virginia home. Vera was only 13 when it happened. She saw the flaming wreckage on the news, saw the body bag they carried her father out in, saw her mother crumple at the funeral. She watched as the official investigation was quietly closed, ruled a mechanical failure, even though all the evidence screamed otherwise. She learned a hard lesson that day. The system doesn't always have your back. Sometimes, it protects the very people who are trying to hurt you. And if you want real justice, you have to become something the system can't sweep under the rug. So at 18, she enlisted, clawed her way up the ranks, and proved herself time and again until the right people noticed, until a man named Jaycock came calling, and she was sent to the front lines of a war that never made the news. And with every kill she confirmed, every enemy she took down, she'd cross a name off a very specific list, a list of 23 names tied to her father's murder, scattered among her 847 total targets. 23 people who figured they were untouchable, who thought they had gotten away with it all. They were dead wrong. But the network was far bigger than 23 names. It was bigger than she ever imagined. And now, it was closing in on Kane. That meant it was time to come out of the shadows. Time to play the one card they never saw coming. The fact that she was still alive. That Death Angel didn't die in Kabul. That she's been right here, watching, waiting for them to slip up. And tomorrow morning, when Kane tries to disgrace her in front of a crowd, when a man named Brooks tries to trap her in a made-up fraud charge, when they push and push, trying to break her, that's when they'll finally see the truth. That's when the tattoo will be revealed. That's when the truth becomes impossible to bury. It's not because she's looking for glory. Glory gets you killed. It's because Kaine has to know he's a marked man. Brooks needs to realize he's just a pawn in their game. The only way to stop this is to flip the entire chessboard over and make everyone see the real players. A knock on her door, 3 quick taps, a pause, then 2 more. The package. Vera gets up, walks to the door, and opens it just a crack. A man in plain clothes, maybe in his mid-30s, with a completely blank face, hands her a small case. He gives a single nod, then turns and walks off without a single word. She shuts the door, places the case on her desk, and opens it. Inside is a pre-programmed, encrypted, and untraceable phone, alongside a single photograph. It's a picture of Admiral Kane leaving his on-base housing, timestamped just 2 hours ago. In the background, almost out of sight, is a sedan with tinted windows. It's the same model that was parked down the street from her father's house the night before he was killed. She would recognize it anywhere. The plates were different, maybe even the year, but the model, the setup, it was the network's calling card. They were creatures of habit. She puts the photo down and picks up the phone. It's already on, displaying a single contact, Tower 4. She doesn't make the call. Not yet. Tomorrow has to happen first. The big reveal has to happen first. That moment when Kaine understands exactly who he's dealing with, then she'll make the call. Then, it's phase 3. Vera pulls her sleeve back down, hiding the tattoo. She lies down on the bed, lacing her hands behind her head and staring up at the ceiling. Sleep is going to be a long time coming tonight. It always is before a mission. But she's fine with that. She's learned to operate with no sleep. She's learned to push through the pain, the fear, and all the signals that are supposed to make a human body just quit. Jaycock had trained that out of her a long time ago. Tomorrow at 0800 hours, Kaine and Brooks are going to do their best to break her. They are going to fail spectacularly. And in doing so, they're going to trigger a chain of events they can't even begin to comprehend. A chain reaction that ends with the network in flames, the guilty brought to justice, and a final reckoning. Real justice, not the clean, tidy version you see on TV. It was long overdue. 847 confirmed kills. 23 of them were for her dad. The rest were for her country, for her team, for the mission. Tomorrow isn't about raising that number. Tomorrow is about making sure target number 848 never happens. It's about keeping Kaine alive long enough to testify. It's about ensuring the people who murdered David Cross never get the chance to murder anyone else. She shuts her eyes, breathing in a 444 count. It's the same rhythm that kept her grounded through firefights, interrogations, and 3 long years in hiding. It's the rhythm that will see her through tomorrow and whatever comes next. Because she's more than a sniper, more than a soldier. She is a promise, made in blood and honored in silence. A promise that the guilty will be held accountable, that the dead will have their justice, and that the system, for all its corruption, can be forced to do the right thing if someone is willing to pay the cost. Vera Cross has been paying that cost for 16 years. Ever since the day her father was taken from her, ever since she realized that some debts can only be paid one way. With patience, with precision, and with a cold, relentless focus that doesn't end until the target is neutralized and the mission is done. Tomorrow morning, that mission continues. And Admiral Kane, whether he realizes it yet or not, is about to become an asset. A protected one. The kind who gets to live because someone else decided he was worth dying for. She hopes he is. She truly does. Because if this all goes south, if the network figures out her plan before she can see it through, then everything all 16 years, all 847 lives will have been for nothing. But it won't go wrong. She won't allow it. Death Angel never misses. Not from 800 meters, not from 800 yards, not ever. The ceiling fan spins lazily above her, its blades slicing through the quiet air. Out in the hall, she hears footsteps, a distant laugh, someone shouting something she can't make out. The sounds of a normal life. The kind of life she had a lifetime ago, before she became this thing. Before the tattoo, before the list, before it all went dark. Maybe, just maybe, when this is all over, she can have that again. Maybe she can just be Vera Cross, a daughter and a soldier, instead of Death Angel, a ghost, and a weapon. Maybe there's a future for her that doesn't end in a dark room, zip-tied to a chair, with stone-faced men asking questions she will die before answering. Maybe, but tomorrow comes first. The test comes first. The reveal comes first. That single moment when Admiral Victor Kane sees the ink on her arm and realizes he isn't dealing with just some enlisted marksman. He's dealing with the woman who pulled him out of a firefight in a valley in Afghanistan 5 years ago. The woman who has officially been dead for the last 3 years. The woman who is about to tell him that he's next on their hit list. Unless she stops them. And she will stop them, no matter the cost, no matter who falls. The mission is everything. The mission is all she has left. Vera opens her eyes one last time, her gaze falling on the photograph on the desk. Kaine, the sedan, the enemy, closing in. She burns the image into her memory, then picks up the photo, rips it into tiny pieces, and flushes it down the toilet. All evidence gone. Her tracks are covered, everything just as it should be. Tomorrow, 0800 hours, Fort Davidson qualification range, lane 3. The setup is different, the conditions are different, but the result will be the same, because the only thing that ever really changes is the distance. The fundamentals never do. Breathe, settle, fire. Repeat until the target is down, until the mission is finished, until justice is finally served. She lies back on the bed. This time, sleep actually comes. It's not a restful sleep, not a peaceful one, but it's something. And with it come dreams, not of the basement, not of the interrogations, but of her father. He's standing in their old kitchen, flipping pancakes, smiling, alive, the way he was before the bomb, before the network, before the world fell apart. In the dream, he turns to her and says, "I'm proud of you, Vera. Finish it." And she will. It all starts tomorrow at 0800 hours. It starts with 5 perfect shots and one very, very surprised Admiral. The fan keeps turning, the night grows darker, and Death Angel sleeps, dreaming of the justice she's about to deliver. The morning air still held the chill of the desert night. The qualification range was set up on the far edge of Fort Davidson, built for formal, observable testing. It had concrete firing lanes, standardized targets, and cameras positioned to capture every single angle. Nothing was being left to chance. Admiral Kaine showed up early, flanked by 4 officers, Brooks among them. They took up observation posts that gave them a perfect view of Lane 3. Have you ever been set up to fail so spectacularly that a crowd actually gathers to watch you fall flat on your face? That was the scene at 7:58 in the morning. Lieutenant Brooks was the ringmaster, clutching a clipboard packed with regulations he'd been studying since 5 a.m., ready to document every mistake she made. The rangemaster, Ellis, looked like he hadn't slept a wink, knowing deep down that rules weren't going to prevent the disaster he felt brewing. An order had come down from Colonel Vance. Let it play out. But all of Ellis's instincts were screaming that today was going to be a train wreck. The whole base was buzzing about the mystery woman who'd shown up the day before and embarrassed a top admiral. Now, they were all here to see her put back in her place. They wanted proof that yesterday was no fluke, that the world still made sense, a world where skill and rank went hand in hand. Brooks glanced at his watch. 2 minutes to go. Admiral Kane stood silently, ignoring Brooks's question about whether she'd even show. Something about her performance yesterday kept replaying in his mind, the controlled breathing, the total calm under pressure. He'd only seen that level of composure in elite operators on missions so secret they'd be denied for the next 50 years. Then, at exactly 800 hours, she appeared. She wore the same plain uniform, with no rank, carrying a rifle case. The crowd parted as she walked through, her eyes locked on shooting Lane 3, completely unfazed. Brooks stepped directly in her way. "I'll need to inspect your weapon and gear before we begin." She just stopped and looked at him, saying nothing. "Regulations state that any personal firearms require a pre-qualification inspection," he said, puffing out his chest. "Open the case." She laid it on the ground and unclipped the latches without a word. Brooks got on his knees and started picking it apart, the stock, the receiver, the scope, the barrel. He checked every serial number, measured the trigger pressure, and scrutinized the mounts. With every component that perfectly met regulations, his frustration grew. He couldn't find a single thing wrong. Finally, he snapped the case shut. "Fine. You're clear to proceed," he said, getting to his feet. "But you should know, the target is at 1,000 meters today, not 800. That's a whole different ballgame. You get 3 attempts, 5 shots each. You need a minimum score of 45 out of 50 to qualify. And just so we're clear," he added with a smirk, "we have cameras recording from every conceivable angle this time." She just picked up her case, walked over to Lane 3, and began setting up her gear. The crowd shuffled in closer, someone whispering a joke about needing a telescope just to see her miss. The whole thing felt more like a circus than a military qualification. The range officer's voice boomed over the speaker. "Shooter, you have 10 minutes to prepare. 3 attempts, 5 shots per attempt. A minimum score of 45 is required. The range is now hot. You may fire when ready." She settled behind the rifle, her movements fluid and precise. She adjusted the scope, took a slow, deep breath, and began a steady rhythm. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Brooks leaned over to Kane. "Watch this," he whispered. "First shot's gonna be a wash." A classic rookie mistake at this range. The crack of the rifle shot was sharp and clean. 1,000 meters away, the target camera feed flashed, showing the impact. A perfect hit in the center 10-point ring. Brooks just blinked. "Lucky shot," he muttered. The wind must have helped her. The second shot followed with the same mechanical precision. The screen showed another perfect 10. The crowd fell silent. The joke stopped. People started leaning in, paying real attention. The third, fourth, and fifth shots all landed in the exact same spot, creating a perfect group, 50 out of 50 points on her very first try. Brooks's face went white as he stared at the monitor. "Check the rangefinder," he stammered. "That can't be right." Ellis's voice came over the radio, calm and clear. "All systems confirmed. Range is 1,000 meters, plus or minus .3. We verified calibration this morning. By the book." Kane stepped closer to the screen, his eyes wide. He was looking at 5 bullet holes clustered so tightly together you could cover them with a fist. At 1,000 meters, with a shifting wind, it wasn't just skill. His mind started racing, connecting the dots, the breathing, the posture, that impossible precision. The range officer announced the second attempt, but Brooks held up a hand. "Wait, we're changing the conditions. Move her to lane 5. Ellis's voice crackled over the radio, sharp with disapproval. "Lieutenant, that is a breach of protocol. I'm using my discretion as a safety officer," Brooks snapped back. "Lane 3 is getting a wind shadow from the trees. Lane 5 is completely exposed to the elements. If she's really that good, it shouldn't be a problem." Kane gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Do it." Vera stood up without a word, packed her gear, and moved to lane 5. This was a blatant attempt to rattle her, to break her concentration. But if she felt the pressure, she didn't show it. She just set up her station again, running through the same methodical checklist, and settled in with that same steady 444 breathing. The wind on lane 5 was brutal. You could see the flags downrange whipping in 10-mile-per-hour gusts. Brooks was counting on the new angle and the harsh conditions to shatter her lucky streak. 5 more shots rang out, each with the same perfect rhythm. 5 more hits, dead in the center, another perfect 50. That was 100 out of 100 points. The crowd was absolutely speechless, their earlier mockery replaced by stunned awe. Phones were out, recording what was quickly becoming a legend. Brooks's clipboard slipped from his hand and clattered to the ground. For the third attempt, "I want." "No," Kane said, his voice quiet but firm. "There will be no more attempts. She's qualified. She's more than qualified." He walked right up to her station. "Who trained you?" Vera kept her focus downrange. "Various instructors, sir." "That's not a real answer," Kane pressed. "It's the only answer you're cleared to receive, sir." Kane's jaw clenched. "I want your identification and your full service record." Now, she finally lifted her head, and her stormy gray eyes met his, completely calm. "I really don't think you do, sir. Not here. Not in front of all these people." "That wasn't a suggestion," Kane growled. Brooks moved in, trying to reassert his authority. "Show us your ID. Show us your orders. Prove you even belong on this base. Because right now, I'm thinking this is some kind of elaborate hoax." He reached out and grabbed her arm, trying to haul her to her feet, his fingers wrapped tightly around her left forearm. As he pulled, her uniform sleeve slid up, and the tattoo was suddenly visible for everyone to see. It was a sniper's scope reticle, and inside the crosshairs was the number 847. Below it were the words, "Death Angel," the dates 2018 to 2021, and the unmistakable insignia of the Joint Special Operations Command. Brooks froze, his hand still gripping her arm, his mouth hanging open. A tidal wave of whispers swept through the crowd. Those who were close enough pointed, and someone gasped. In the control booth, Ellis went pale, his hand gripping the console for support. He'd suspected something, but seeing the proof was something else. He keyed his radio. "All personnel, stand down. I repeat, all personnel, stand down." Kane just stared at the tattoo, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, to recognition, and then to pure horror. His lips formed a name he couldn't speak. Then he said it louder. 847. She calmly pulled her arm free. Brooks let go of her arm like he'd been burned. She rolled her sleeve back down, but the secret was out. Everyone there had just seen a ghost. Kane's voice was barely a whisper. "You're... Ghost." The name silenced the entire range. 50 people stood frozen. The legend of Ghost, call sign 847, the operator who had been declared killed in action 3 years ago, was standing right in front of them, alive and breathing. An older man in a veteran's cap pushed through the crowd. It was retired Master Sergeant Lin, who had driven all the way from Mesa because Ellis had called him. He stopped 10 feet away, his eyes locked on her arm, and his face lit up with a look of pure reverence. "Death Angel," he said. "Operation Silent Dawn, Afghanistan, 2020. You pulled the Admiral's team out of that valley, took down 30 hostiles in 6 minutes. Longest confirmed shot was 1,200 meters, Lin continued, his voice thick with emotion. The official report said you died in Kabul. Want to know how someone who's been dead for 3 years shows up to save the living? Share this video so everyone sees what real justice looks like." Vera slowly got to her feet and faced Kane directly. "I'm Captain Vera Cross, Joint Special Operations Command, Sniper Operations from 2018 through 2021. 847 confirmed eliminations. And you, Admiral Kane, are in immediate danger." Kane took an involuntary step back. "What are you talking about?" "The same shadow network that was responsible for my father's death, Brigadier General David Cross, back in 2016, is now targeting you. They know you're set to testify before Congress next month. They know what evidence you have, and they are planning to take you out before you get the chance." Brooks found his voice, though it was shaking. That's crazy." Vera turned her gaze on him. "Lieutenant Brooks, how long has your family been getting anonymous threats? When did you start getting pictures in the mail? The ones of your wife, Sarah, leaving her office? Of your kids, Emma and Lucas, playing at their school?" Brooks froze, his face a mask of terror. "How do you know their names?" "Because," Vera said, her voice dropping, "the same people threatening them are the ones who sent me on a suicide mission in Kabul. They've been blackmailing you, using your family to pressure you into sabotaging anyone who gets too close to Admiral Kane. They are holding your family right now." The clipboard fell from Brooks's hand with a loud clatter. He started shaking uncontrollably. "You don't know what you're talking about. Warehouse on the south side of the base," she stated flatly. 2 guards posted outside, 3 more inside with your family. "You've been receiving encrypted messages for the last 6 weeks, haven't you?" she continued, laying out the entire operation. "It started small leaking schedules, personnel reports. Then it escalated. They gave you instructions to interfere with anyone showing too much interest in the Admiral. When I arrived yesterday, your orders were to make sure I failed this qualification, and to do it publicly." Brooks stumbled backward, his face crumbling. "I didn't have a choice," he choked out. "They sent me proof. They showed me what they do to them. I had to." "I know," Vera said, her tone softening slightly. "That's why I'm here. We're going to get them back." Kane was trying to process it all. The woman he thought was a ghost, the conspiracy he thought was dead, the immediate threat to his life. If this is true, why all the theatrics? Why didn't you just come to me? "Because," she said, locking eyes with him, "I needed to know who the mole was on your staff. I needed the network to get overconfident and make a move. And I needed you to see for yourself what I can do before I told you what was coming," she explained. Her gaze was steady. "5 years ago in that valley, you got on the radio and asked who I was. I told you it didn't matter. You just needed to focus on staying alive. It's the same situation now, Admiral. You need to stay alive long enough to testify. I'm going to make sure that happens." Master Sergeant Lin stepped forward. "Captain Cross, what do you need from us?" "We need to extract Lieutenant Brooks's family," she said, taking command. "I have 43 minutes before they move them to a secondary location. If that happens, we lose them for good." She then turned to a broken-looking Brooks. "I can get them back, but you have to help me. You have to tell me everything you know, right now." The confession finally tumbled out of Lieutenant Brooks between racking sobs. 6 weeks of pure terror, of being forced into impossible choices, caught between saving his family and betraying his country. It was all over. He told her everything. A warehouse, somewhere in the South Side Industrial District. They'd blindfolded him when they took him to see his family, just to prove they were alive. Vera looked at Admiral Kane, her voice steady. I've been tracking this network for 3 months. I know their safe houses, their routines, their people. Sir, I need your authorization to conduct a hostage rescue on American soil. This time, Kane didn't hesitate for a second. You've got it. What else? I need Lieutenant Brooks with me, and you need to stay right here, surrounded by all these people, until it's done. The network won't make a move on you with this many witnesses. She took a breath. And I need Rangemaster Ellis to pull all the security footage from 3 months ago. I want to see every vehicle that entered the industrial area between 2 and 4 in the morning. The person pulling the strings is right here on this base. They're high-ranking, someone everyone trusts, operating right under our noses. Ellis was already on the move. I'm on it. Kane looked at Vera, really looked at her, seeing the woman behind the uniform, the woman who had saved his life, who had survived 8 months in hell, and who had been hunting her father's murderers for 16 years. Why didn't you tell me any of this when you first got here? Her eyes met his. Because I needed you to see who I really am before I asked you to trust me. Yesterday, you saw a nobody. Today, you know I'm the ghost. The woman who saved your life. The one who never misses. And now, I'm asking you to trust me just one more time. Her voice dropped, becoming quiet and intense. 8 years ago, my father was your partner. The two of you were investigating fraud in military procurement. He found proof of a massive corruption network, embedded deep. The night before he was scheduled to brief the Secretary of Defense, someone planted a bomb under his car. I was 13 years old. I saw it on the news, watched them carry what was left of him away. Her voice was level, but laced with a pain that never went away. They called it a mechanical failure and closed the case. But I knew better. Even at 13, I knew he was murdered. So I waited. I joined the military the day I turned 18. I worked my way up, got recruited into a special unit, and on every mission I ran, every target I took down, I checked them against a list of names connected to my father's murder. 23 of my 847 targets were on that list. 23 people who thought they had gotten away with killing a brigadier general. Kane's face went pale. David Cross. He was my friend, my partner. When he died, he trailed off. I knew it wasn't an accident, but I didn't have any proof, and I was scared. I had a wife and kids, so I kept my mouth shut. I told myself there was nothing I could do. I know, Vera said softly. That's why I'm here. This isn't about revenge. It's about finishing what he started. Because the same network that killed my father is now coming after you. And this time, I'm the one with the skills, the training, and the evidence to burn them to the ground. But I need you alive to testify. I need Lieutenant Brooks here to choose redemption over fear. And I need 42 minutes to pull off a rescue that will save 3 innocent lives and crack this network wide open. Brooks wiped the tears from his face. If this is a lie, my family dies, Kane dies, and the network wins. I'm not lying, Lieutenant, Vera said. I'm giving you one shot to make this right, to be on the right side of history, to save your family and help me finish what my father started. She slung her rifle case over her shoulder. So, are you coming with me or not? Brooks looked to Kane, who gave a single, firm nod. Go, bring them home. And Brooks, you were put in an impossible situation. But right now, you have a chance to make it right. Take it. Brooks's shoulders straightened. Yes, sir. The crowd of onlookers parted like the sea as Vera and Brooks walked through. Lynn, her second in command, fell in step behind them. Then 3 other veterans, seeing what was about to go down, followed suit. By the time they hit the parking lot, they were a 6-person team. They piled into 2 SUVs. Vera took the wheel of the lead vehicle with Brooks in the passenger seat. As they sped south toward the industrial district, the sun finally crested the horizon, bathing the desert in a golden light. 41 minutes until the hostages were scheduled to be moved. It was 8:52 in the morning. The warehouse stood alone, a rusty box surrounded by a chain-link fence. 2 guards were outside, lazily smoking cigarettes, their rifles slung over their shoulders. They weren't expecting company. The network had been operating without a single problem for years, and they had gotten careless. Vera parked 3 blocks away and gathered her small team. Brooks, you stay with the vehicles. Keep the engines running. The second you see us come out with your family, you drive. Got it? I should be in there with you. You're too emotionally involved, Vera countered. You'll make a mistake. Let me do my job. She turned to Lynn and the others. We use non-lethal rounds if we can, but the hostages are the priority. They walk out of there alive, no matter what. Lynn just nodded. Protect the innocent. Everything else is secondary. Vera checked her watch. 38 minutes. We go in 3 teams. They split up, approaching from opposite sides. Vera from the east and Lynn from the west. The 2 guards never even saw them coming. 2 soft hisses from suppressed rifles, and both men crumpled to the ground, hit with tranquilizer darts. The team moved to the door. Vera didn't bother with a dramatic breach. She expertly picked the lock and eased the door open. Silence can be a weapon too. Inside, 3 men were sitting around a table playing cards. In the far corner, Sarah Brooks was tied to a chair, her 2 small children huddled at her feet, also bound, but thankfully unharmed. The card players didn't even have time to stand up. Vera's team flowed into the room like a shadow, smooth, silent, and overwhelming. In less than 15 seconds, all 3 men were on the ground, disarmed and secured with zip ties. Sarah was sobbing, pulling her kids into a desperate hug. But Vera wasn't finished. She moved to a back office, rifle at the ready, and kicked the door clean off its hinges. A woman was sitting at the desk inside. She looked to be in her early 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her uniform bore the silver eagle of a full colonel. It was Diane Frost, the deputy commander of the entire base, a respected leader and the secret architect of the whole damn network. Frost looked up without a hint of surprise. Captain Cross, I was wondering when you'd finally put it all together. Get up, Vera ordered. Hands where I can see them. Frost rose slowly. You know, this doesn't really change anything. I'm just one part of a much larger machine, maybe, Vera said, her voice like ice. But you're the part that killed my father. You're the part that sold me out to our enemies. And you're the part that ends today. You're going to testify. You are going to give me every name, every bank account, every single piece of this puzzle. Because if you don't, you'll spend the rest of your life rotting in a supermax prison with no deal, no protection, and no hope. Frost just smiled, a cold, empty gesture. You think I'm afraid of prison? No, but I think you're terrified of being irrelevant, of being forgotten, of dying in a cage while your precious network moves on without you. Vera stepped closer. Testify, and you get to be the one who burns it all down. You'll be a whistleblower, a name in the history books. Refuse, and you're just another corrupt officer who got caught. The choice is yours, Colonel. For the first time, a flicker of something, fear, or maybe just calculation crossed Frost's eyes. On your knees, Vera commanded softly, hands behind your head. Frost hesitated for a long second. Then, slowly, she knelt. Lynn moved in and cuffed her. Outside, Brooks saw his family walking out of the warehouse. Sarah ran to him, and their children clung to his legs. He fell to his knees, pulling them all into a massive hug, tears streaming down his face. I'm so sorry. I should have. You saved us, Sarah whispered into his ear. That's all that matters. Vera came out last, marching Frost in front of her at gunpoint. By now, Kane had arrived with a full squad of military police. A helicopter circled overhead. The base was on total lockdown. Kane walked right up to Frost, his face like stone. Why? Frost said nothing. Why did you kill David Cross? Why target me? Why betray the oath you swore to uphold? Frost finally spoke, her voice devoid of any emotion. Because the system is rigged. Because the people at the top get rich, while soldiers at the bottom die for nothing. Because someone has to profit from all this chaos. And it might as well be us. Kane's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Us? You said us. Who else is involved? Frost just smiled and said nothing. Vera stepped forward. Oh, she'll talk. They always do. Once they realize the alternative is watching their whole empire crumble from the inside of a cell. The MPs loaded Frost and her 5 thugs into separate vehicles. Medics were already checking on Sarah and the kids, who were shaken but physically fine. Brooks walked over to Vera. In front of everyone, he dropped to one knee. "Captain Cross, I publicly humiliated you. I doubted you. I tried to sabotage you. And all the while, you were protecting my family, you were stopping the people who were about to kill Admiral Kane, and you were finishing what your father started." His voice broke. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm asking for it anyway. You gave me back everything that matters in this world. You gave me my family back. You gave me a chance to do the right thing. I will spend the rest of my life making sure nobody ever forgets what you did today." Vera looked down at him. "Get up, Lieutenant." "I don't." "Stand up," she repeated, her voice firm but not unkind. "You were put in an impossible situation. You made mistakes. But when it counted, you chose to help. You chose to trust me. That's good enough for me." She paused. "Your family is safe. That's what's important. Go be with them." Brooks got to his feet, still shaky. "Thank you for everything." As Brooks walked away to his family, Kane stepped up to Vera. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking at her. Then, slowly and deliberately, he snapped to attention and gave her a sharp, perfect salute. "Captain Cross, on behalf of the United States Navy, on behalf of every single person you have protected, and on behalf of your father, who would be prouder than words can say, thank you." Vera returned the salute. "Just doing my job, sir." "No," Kane's voice was thick with emotion. "You did so much more than your job. You carried a weight that no one should ever have to carry. You hunted my friend's killers while they were hunting you. You gave up everything, your name, your peace, your chance at a normal life to finish what David and I started 8 years ago." He lowered his hand. "And for my part in that, I am so sorry. I'm sorry I was a coward when David died. I'm sorry I stayed silent while you were out there fighting all alone. And I'm sorry it took you coming back from the dead to make me remember what honor really means. What happens when the system you swore to protect is rotten to the core." Vera's voice was quiet. "You're testifying now. That takes guts." He shook his head. "Only because you gave me a reason. You saved my life twice. Once in Afghanistan, and once right here." Kane paused, looking at her. "So, what happens now?" Vera watched the sun peek over the horizon. "Now, the evidence goes to Congress. Frost's entire network is about to unravel. They're investigating 12 officers by tonight, and at least 20 more by the end of the week. The fraud, the intelligence leaks, it's all coming into the light. It means my father's death wasn't for nothing," she said softly. "The system he believed in is finally working." He looked at her. "And you? What's next for Captain Vera Cross?" Her answer was simple. "I testify. Then I go back to being a ghost. This was always temporary," he argued. "You've earned a Medal of Honor, a promotion, all the recognition in the world." "I don't want recognition, sir," she replied, her voice firm. "I want my father's killers behind bars. I want their network destroyed. And I needed you, alive, to testify. Mission accomplished." She started to turn away. "Vera," Kane's voice stopped her. "Your father told me something the night before he was killed. He said, if anything happens to me, tell Vera she doesn't have to be a soldier. Tell her she can just be my daughter. And tell her that's more than enough." Vera squeezed her eyes shut for a moment. When she opened them again, they were glistening. "Thank you for telling me that, sir," he pressed. "Will you think about staying? The military needs people like you, people who can't be bought, or scared, or broken." "The military has people like me," she countered. "They just need leaders like you to have their backs." She offered a faint, tired smile. 847 confirmed kills. "I think I've done my part. It's time for someone else to carry the rifle." Kane nodded slowly, understanding, and extended his hand. She shook it firmly. As the military police swarmed the scene and medics looked after the Brooks family, Vera walked toward her truck, the base slowly coming to life around her. Lynn met her halfway. "What now, Captain?" She looked at the old Master Sergeant. "You tell me, Master Sergeant. You've been retired for 3 years. You miss it?" Lynn let out a soft chuckle. every single day. Vera smiled. Then maybe it's time we both found something new to do. Something that doesn't involve getting shot at. Sounds boring, he said. Sounds perfect, she replied. They stood there in a comfortable, quiet, just two veterans who had seen and given far too much, watching the world move on. Maybe, finally, it was their chance to rest. 3 months later, after the congressional testimony wrapped up, the sentences came down. Frost got 35 years. 4 other colonels were handed 20 to 30 years each. 12 more officers were court-martialed, the network was shattered, and Brooks, cleared of all charges, went back to duty. His family was finally safe. He even started an unofficial program, mentoring young officers who were struggling with tough moral choices. Kane's testimony lasted 6 hours and led to a complete overhaul of procurement oversight for all branches of the military. He retired with full honors 6 months later and started a scholarship fund in Brigadier General David Cross's name. Vera Cross officially retired. She turned down the Medal of Honor, saying, "Give it to someone who's still in the fight," but she accepted a promotion to major for her 16 years of service. She bought a small, quiet house out in New Mexico, the kind of place where your neighbors mind their own business. But on her desk, there was a plain envelope, partially opened. It had been delivered by hand 3 days ago. Inside was a single photo of a military base she didn't recognize. In the background, a figure was circled in red ink. A note was tucked in with it. "Tower 4 sends regards. One name remains." She stared at that photo for a long, long time before putting it away in a drawer. It wasn't forgotten, just postponed. Because real justice isn't loud and flashy. It's patient. And after 16 years, Vera Cross knew all about patience. She could wait a little longer. In her closet, her rifle case sat, clean, oiled, and ready, just in case. Because the Death Angel might be retired, but some promises don't have an expiration date. Some debts can't be wiped clean. And some missions never really end. They just wait in the shadows until the time is right, until the final shot is fired, and justice is finally served. She closed the drawer, made a fresh pot of coffee, and stepped out onto her porch to watch the desert sunrise. For now, she was just Vera, a daughter, a veteran, a survivor. But if Tower 4 ever called again, if that last name ever stepped out of the shadows, if the mission needed one more confirmed kill to finish what her father started all those years ago, well, Death Angel doesn't miss. Not from 1,000 meters. Every soldier carries a story that most will never hear. If you listen with your heart, you can feel their truth. Thanks for sticking with us. Make sure you subscribe to MVB Story for more.